Just 1 second. Okay. Yeah. You're good.
Hi everybody, my name is Fleming, and I work for Mozilla. Do you have any Firefox fans in here? Alright, we're putting out a new browser on Android, coming up in about a month and a half. So that's my project, Phoenix project. That's the project name, that's not the name of the actual product. We don't know what that's going to be yet. So anyway, I'm working there. I've been there since February, early February. Prior to that, I was at Nike for a few months and helped with their Scrum and Agile practices there. And then prior to that, I was an engineering manager for a small company called Passport Online. We developed software for anywhere from a small mom and pop travel agency to a very large consortia, travel consortia. So I managed the development aspect there, a team of developers and QA and support folks. And then we also manage the larger process, the go-to-market process of actually getting the products out the door. You're familiar with that line. So, interested in knowing how many of you have, let's say, 0 to 2, on a scale of 1 to 10, exposure from 0 to 2 exposure to Agile. Anybody in that range? Okay, so kind of an introduction to it a little bit, and you'd like to know more. What about 2 to 7? Okay, what about 7 to 10? Okay. All right, sounds good. So this presentation was initially about 2 hours long. I've cut down a lot of the detail. Part of what I wrote this presentation for was to help Nike in particular determine which best method of Agile to use for what they were wanting to accomplish. It was kind of in between Kanban and Scrum. And so the idea was to present what the benefits of each of those were and then why you would choose one over the other. I do go back a little bit and talk about Lean. Lean kind of encompasses all of that. And there are aspects of Lean that apply to every day of my life. So I like to be able to have that as the backdrop for anything talking about Agile. So we'll talk a little bit about what Lean is and where it came from, and then dive a little bit deeper into Agile, where that came from, and then talk towards the end about the difference between Kanban and Scrum and why you might choose one over the other. Any questions before I dive in? Cool. Raise your hand if I start talking too fast. I have a tendency to do that. I used to be a teacher in another life, but it's been a long time. Okay. So, Lean and Agile concepts. Lean is, started out in the manufacturing industry. The whole idea was wanting to be able to provide as much value for our customers, but minimizing the waste. So that's one of the big things that you consider Lean all the way around is how do I get rid of the waste? There's waste in nearly everything we do. How can we minimize that? So that's where Lean is starting from. As I mentioned, it kind of originated in the Toyota production system, and it used to be called just in time. And so the kind of neat thing about that is they were really successful. Toyota became really successful after World War II, and they based their success initially on what Ford was doing. But then when they started getting deeper into that, they started doing it in much more small batches of work. And so they would have to often change things out. And so the process needed to be super clean and efficient and slim. So that's where the whole concept of Lean came in, because they couldn't just do a whole mass round, of a part and then another whole mass round of another part. They did small batches of these. So in manufacturing, it was very important for them to be able to bring that down into a very slim and slender group of work that they could minimize the transitions from. Whoa. This thing moves. There's 7 principles that we talk about when we're looking at Lean. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on each one of these. There are some that in particular that I will talk about because they're really key in terms of maximizing your effort and your control over your project. The first one is respecting people. That's common across all of the Agile. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember when waterfall was the key and developers weren't even involved in estimating the work. The VPs and the marketing folks who had to say, this is when you have to have this product to me, and developers would bust their butts to do that. I remember those days. That doesn't happen hardly ever anymore. I haven't been in a company that did that for a long time. So now part of respecting people is asking the people that are doing the work to provide the estimates. That's part of what's happening here. Eliminate waste, that's a big one. And we'll get more into that as we move through the slide presentation here. Building quality in, there's lots of ways to do that. I'm just going to mention a few right now, but we want to talk about from the very beginning, building the quality in. So, for example, on my Scrum team, we have multiple checkpoints before something ever even gets checked in code-wise. The first one is we do a tech review. So before a developer really jumps in and takes on a new code base or a new project that they're working on, they will meet with the tech lead and they'll go over the design and they'll talk about the implementation in high level at least, detail if we need it. So that's before we ever write and make sure that we're looking at the acceptance criteria, we know what we're building, and we're clear that it's going to be aligned with the larger scope. So that's the first check. The second check, the developer goes in, begins their work, and they might do a user interface check. So they talk with our design specialist and say, okay, this is what I'm thinking, this is what it looks like to me, is this meeting your needs? So this is all before anything ever gets checked in. Then they would often do what we call a desk check with the product owner. These terms may not mean a whole lot to those of you that aren't familiar with Scrum. The product owner is the person who really defines what we build. So UX may provide input into that, but the person that is responsible for saying this is what we're building and why we're building it, that's the product owner. And they would come over to this, basically to the desk, if you're co-located, and look over the developer's shoulder as he walks through what he's done. Still hasn't checked anything yet. Okay, so at this point, or at least merged anything, might have checked it in, hasn't merged it to the master. So all of those are happening because we want to get feedback and build the quality in from the very beginning. The later that you get that feedback and the later that you do that kind of testing, the more costly it is. If you get something clear out into the user base and we've got customers reporting defects or bad design, then you have to undo all the things that you've done. So we want that feedback as early as possible. So that's building quality in. Another aspect of that is doing code reviews, doing pair programming. There's a way to start building your code in such a way that it's building the quality as we go in. Defer commitment. This was a tough one because I'm a planner and I like to commit to things. I like to know what it is that I'm going to deliver, and I like to build towards that. In Agile, the whole concept behind Agile is that we want to deliver what is best. And the point in time that you are right now, you're going to have the least knowledge about what is best than you ever will in that project. Wherever you are right now, you don't know. You don't know all the things that you don't know. So the idea is to defer making decisions as long as you can. Now that's not deferring them until it's too late. The idea is defer to the last responsible moment. So that's tricky, knowing when to say, okay, we have to make this decision now. We need to make this, and we need to make it considering all the things that may be coming up. But you don't want to make it so early on that you're going to lock yourself into something that you can't get out of it. Create knowledge. The idea here is part of respecting people is we want to build a team. Let's see, can I write on this board? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Trip anything here. We want to build a team that is, for Agile, made up of what we call T-shaped individuals. So what we're looking for is a cross-functional team where we've got everybody on your team, on your development team, that is needed to build that product. So you should have anybody on the back end, if you've got back-end SQL work, if you've got UI work, if you've got a designer, all the people that are needed to get that product built, we'd like to have on the team. Now, when it comes to UX and QA, they're their own disciplines and they would be part of this team, but they wouldn't necessarily be part of what I'm drawing here. This is in regard to all of your engineers, all of your developers there. We want to build a team that has people who could pick up just about any story. They have a wide range of areas where they could pick up and add value. They've got at least one area where they've got a deep knowledge. So an area of expertise, an area they've got specific interest in, whatever that may be. You want to develop that, but you also want to start cross-pollinating all of the other things that the team needs. So that if you lose a person on the team, PTO, sickness, whatever, somebody can pick up that work. So creating the knowledge, that's part of why we do pair programming. Anybody heard that term? Pair programming is can be very useful. Pair, P-A-I-R, pair programming. So the idea of pair programming is that you've got two developers working on the same code, basically. And it's hard to implement it correctly, and it's hard to sell because you've got two resources working on the same thing, and so that's hard to tell management that it's efficient. I believe personally that pair programming is very useful for this cross-pollination in getting, for example, a brand new developer up to speed on something, or in a new code base that they're not familiar with, doing some pair programming up front with that. But I have to admit that once you've got the knowledge pretty well transferred, it becomes more expensive to have that. So in lieu of doing pair programming, once you've got both developers up to speed on that particular code base, something else that you can do is called code reviews. Does anybody do code reviews here? Familiar? The idea there being you don't sit with the other two developers together to work through it, but once that one developer has finished his work, he would have somebody else up here work over that, look it over, talk through it. I prefer to actually have that sitting down together and going over it together so that you can walk through it together, as opposed to saying, here you go, take a look, comment back. Having that communication is really helpful. So that's another way to create knowledge on the team. Deliver fast. Another term for that is fail fast. So in Agile, we don't condemn failure. It's a learning experience, and it's a very valuable one. So a lot of what we do, we end up trying this. We want to try this. We want to try it in such a way that we can deliver it fast, get it out there in somebody's hands, and get the feedback. Kind of comes back to that first, or that eliminate waste, the build quality in, the things that, whatever we can do to get the feedback back into our knowledge base so that we can then do it right. And we tweak it, and we tweak it, and we tweak it. We iterate and build it. And so the sooner you can get it out there and get it into somebody's hands that can provide feedback, the better. Optimizing the whole. This is one of my favorites. So, I'm trying to remember the name of this book. Beyond Reengineering, I think was the name of the book. But it talked about it's impossible to really build an efficient system when you focus on the individual pieces. So let's say we're trying to build something and there are 4 different pieces to that. And within each one, we have made it as efficient as possible, and each one of these is going really, really well within each individual piece. We can optimize it, we've been super efficient with that, but the transition from one to the next is not efficient. Doesn't matter how efficient you are within each one of these, it's still going to take forever to get there if the transitions are not efficient. So any kind of handoffs that you do, any kind of you need reviews from your product owner, you need reviews from a beta group of customers, you need reviews from design, you need to hand off the design to the developer. If those handoffs are not efficient, you're going to fail in terms of meeting your schedule. So optimizing the whole is talking about not just getting very, very efficient in the way you work, but in the way you work with everybody else. Does that make sense? Any questions?
You were talking about doing code reviews after you've done with creating knowledge. Do you think it's appropriate for a product owner to actually do a code review with someone, or is that kind of outside?
Not usually, because normally it's pretty rare. I've worked with some product owners that are very knowledgeable on code, but the purpose of the code review is to, number one, make sure that it's clean, that it follows the standards that you've got for code review, and it's the most efficient and effective way to do what you're doing. The product owner generally is not going to have the kind of knowledge to be able to provide that. However, I did also mention a desk check with the product owner. And a desk check is where they sit down and the developer walks them through the functionality of it, and that's critical. Because again, they're the ones that sign off and say, yeah, this is what I want. Uh-oh. Did I fall asleep again?
No, I still have you on here.
So I've talked about a lot of these, and I'm just going to kind of zip through these on some of the details in terms of, when we talked about respecting people. One way is to make sure that the people that are doing the work get to do the estimating. Another way is to have a self-organizing team. This is something that's really nice if you've got a mature enough team to do this. A brand new team may find it difficult to do this because the idea of a self-organizing team is they drive themselves. Nobody is telling them what to do beyond the initial planning of the product owner saying this is what we want to build. And then the team is able to pick up as necessary the individuals that can do the work, the individuals that can do the best work, working to decide who needs the knowledge transfer here, what can we do. They work together to do that and they manage themselves. So one of the key things, this is difficult for a lot of companies. Business requests the what. They say what we want, but they do not tell the developers how. So a lot of the times, requirements come in the form of, I want it like this, I want this, let me give an example. I want to give the user the ability to open a new window by clicking open button. That's just describing how. So maybe that's the best way to do it, maybe it's not. So the idea is business should present what they want to build as a user. As a user, I want to be able to open a new window so that I can browse a new whatever. But when they bring that to you as a developer, then it's your job to figure out the best way to meet that need. And it's a conversation. So you consider all of the options. There may be some that would be difficult and more complex to implement, might be the best way to do it. But if we've got a timeline, maybe that's not the best way to do it. So you provide the options. You go back to your product owner, you say, I could do it this way or this way or this way. These are the benefits. What do you think? And then they make a choice. So the idea is to provide enough knowledge so your product owner can define exactly what they're looking for. That make sense? Eliminating waste. So we've talked about this quite a bit. Defects, again, defects that are caught late out in the field are going to cost far more than a defect that's caught very early. So we want to avoid defects. You're never going to have a zero defect product, but if you can avoid them, if you can catch them earlier, it's going to be a whole lot better for your timeline. Delays, that's what I was talking over there, any kind of handoff delays, that's going to be waste. That's all waste. It's wasted time, it's wasted effort. Handoffs there's different kinds of delays, and handoffs is one of them. Relearning. How many times have you been in a position where you worked on a product or you worked on a particular piece of code and then it sat, maybe it was in testing or whatever, somebody was out and it sat for 3 weeks, and then they came back and said, oh, we have a fix, we have this defect in here, and you had to go back and how did I do that? What was that again? And you have to relearn what you did. That's waste. That's a lot of waste. So trying to, again, shorten the feedback loop, getting things back to you as soon as possible is going to help. Context switching. This is an interesting one. They say that, let's see my notes here, as much as 20% of a programmer's time can be lost to context switching when a second project is added. So you're working on 20% of your time is wasted by switching from one to the other between two. When a third project is added, nearly half of your time is lost to context switching. So, one of the other things that I've discovered in the various places I've been is it's difficult for a team to stay focused on a product when they're also maintaining another product. And that's nothing new, because that requires a lot of context switching. You've got a product, you're working, maybe there's multiple things going on within that particular product, but if you're also trying to deal with customer issues and defects and bugs coming in elsewhere on this other one, and somebody's got to hit the high priority ones and you can't let them wait, that's a lot of context switching. When I first went to Passport, they were trying to do Scrum, they were trying to do 2-week iterations. They could never meet their Scrum goals because they were always derailed by the defects coming in, by the critical defects that they had to address. So one of the first things I asked them to try was setting aside what we called a response team. So that team was made up of 2 people to start, and they were 100% focused on maintaining the existing products. They took care of all the defects, they took care of any kind of analysis that needed to be done on those projects, kept the rest of the team completely insulated from that. There were times, because of that T-shaped person over there, that we needed somebody on the product development team, because they had the deeper knowledge on a particular topic, to be pulled in, but we planned for that. And it was something that we were able to set aside time as needed, or at least we really minimize the time that they had to spend on it. So that works really well. Of course, it's hard to find somebody who just wants to work on bugs. So I actually did find somebody like that for Passport. It's pretty awesome. But the other thing that we did, and we found very helpful to meet some of the other goals that we talked about, like teaching other people and cross-pollinating the knowledge, was we had people on the product development team that would rotate into the response team for a week or even a sprint, 2 weeks sprint. So they would rotate in, they'd help on that team, they'd get all kinds of exposure to code they hadn't been with before, hadn't seen before, and then they'd rotate off and get back and to be able to build products. So that works pretty well. Any questions? Okay. Work in progress. Work in progress is waste because it's not in the customer's hands. And as long as it's in progress, it's not doing anybody any good. This is a really hard concept to get across, but think about it because it's true. As long as something is sitting in progress, this is another reason why you don't context switch. I went wrong. The idea is if you have 3, 4 different things going on and they're all in progress, none of them are going to get done in time to get it to the customer. They're all going to be getting done at the same time down the road because you're working on 4 things. So the idea is as much as possible, stick with the one thing. Get it done. Get it into the hands of the users. So it's not wasted time. It's wasted until it's in their hands. And overproduction. This is, of all of the wastes, this is probably my favorite. Because have you ever heard the term gold plating? So, as a developer, I was a developer for a year. I don't really fit the mentality so well, but I understand. And I've worked with a lot of developers, and I know what they want to develop, and they can provide the best product they can. They want to make their customers happy. And so it's very easy for them to be in a position that they could say, oh, if I just spent another half an hour on this, I could do this and this and this. And they did something, and it looks good, it looks great to them, might even be something that the customers like, but it wasn't the highest priority thing because the product owner will be telling them what is the highest priority from a holistic viewpoint. So the more time that is spent on gold plating or on taking it just a little further, just a little more, that's wasted time for what the customer really wants. Does that make sense? I mean, I say it's my favorite because there's some good stuff that I've seen come out of that. But truthfully, if you want to do that, go first to your product owner and say, hey, I've got this great idea. What do you think? And they can prioritize it in. And they might even say, depending on how long you think it's going to take you, they might even say, let's do it now. While you're in the code, let's go ahead and do it. They might not.
What do you mean when you say you've seen a lot come out of that?
I've seen some cool stuff come out, some beyond what just the basic was, some things that came. So the 80-20 rule in development is that 80% of what you develop, no, let me rephrase this. 20% of what you develop is used by 80% of the people. So 80% of what you develop is used by 20% of the people. So the focus first must be on that 20% that everybody uses and is valuable to everyone. And then you can start narrowing in on the things that are useful to only to fewer people. And that's what's happening there, is there was some cool stuff that came out that I would use, and I like, that the majority of people probably wouldn't use. Any other question?
Talk a little more about how you implement that culture in a team to minimize daily work in progress and production. With the work in progress, isn't each team member, unless you're a program, going to have their own work in progress, their own story, and then with the production, are you constantly checking out their range to look at what they're doing, or are you like?
So good question. Yes, in general, unless they're personal programming, everyone will have their own story. So they'll have one thing that's a work in progress. Each person on the team will have one thing that's work in progress. What you want to avoid is picking up 2 or 3 more things for that one person to work on, because then you've got 3 things in progress. I mean,
So each person picks something.
yes, pick it up and finish it, and take it to the end, and then pick up something else. Sometimes you get blocked. So I think it's okay to have maybe 2 things in progress. But you need to learn how to balance your work so that you're focusing on getting this one through. As soon as that's unlocked, you jump back there and you get it through. The overproduction. So that comes up in Scrum. most of my experience is in Scrum, I will admit, because in most cases I've had a deadline that I have to meet. And so it's predictable. Scrum, the purpose of Scrum is it allows you to be predictable and you can tell people when you're going to have things done. So in Scrum, the part of the artifacts, I'm not thinking of the right word, is that we do a demo. At the end of every sprint, we do a demonstration of what was done in that sprint. And the purpose of that demo is to show the product owner what you've done and does it meet. Now, if you've implemented the desk checks where you're already doing that, showing them, they're also going to see it there. And you say, what's that? That wasn't on my acceptance criteria. I didn't say to do that. And so, the product owner would be looking over the developer's shoulder saying, show me what you're doing. You know, that's the desk check to say, okay, am I on track? Does this look good? You might even do more than one desk check. I've had that in place where the minute you have something in UI, something that the product owner can look at, get them over there just to take a quick look, 5 seconds, you know, does this look about what you're thinking? Yeah, go for it. Then you move on. And then at the end, when you're done with all the development on that, you show them the functionality as well as the UI. And that's where they say, okay, does this meet my acceptance criteria? Does it do everything that I asked for it to do? And if it does more, then you have a Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master may or may not be attending that. Yeah, it's a Scrum Master's job to help keep everybody on track with that. So the other area where I've seen it come unrailed a little bit is when you have a product owner that is looking at a desk check and they say, well, what if you did this? And it wasn't part of the acceptance criteria, but that'd be so cool if we could do this. And developers want to make them happy, they want to make their customers happy, so they will dive in and do that. As a Scrum Master, I would always try to implement a rule that if they were asked to do anything that was going to take more than 15 minutes, they called me. And then I went to the product owner and said, that needs to be scoped to the next sprint, or else you have to drop something else from this sprint. Anything else? Yeah.
So these overproduction issues, where do they go if a developer has one?
So, there's a couple things I'll mention here. In my belief system, anybody can write a user story. It's the product owner's responsibility to write the user stories. But if a developer or a QA or a designer or a support person has a great idea, they should be encouraged to write a story. It may not be in the right format. It'll be something that later needs to be cleaned up a little bit. But in the process, one of the other, why can't I think of the word I want? Ceremony, thank you. One of the other ceremonies that would happen in Scrum is called backlog grooming and triage. Usually those are two separate meetings, but in the triage meeting, anything new coming in, whether it's a bug or a user story or small enhancement request or whatever you want to call it, I also call them improvements. If it's like tech debt or something that a developer has said, we rushed through this, we really need to go back and refactor, or we skipped unit tests, we need to put some unit tests in here, they can enter a story, call it improvement, code improvement or whatever, and that goes in there as well. In triage, the idea is to prioritize all of the things coming in. So everything is looked at together and prioritized. And so those stories, the enhancement requests that anybody else has written, those are prioritized right along with everything else. So anybody should have an opportunity to put that in. Yeah.
Would you also say overproduction is analogous to scope creep?
Yes. No, sorry. Scope creep, if it's something like what I mentioned where the product owner is sitting down with them and saying, for this story, what if we did this and this? Yeah, that's definitely a sense of overproduction. Generally, the term here is talking about the team making that decision. There's an argument for a product owner things that they ask for. It depends on your culture, and it depends on what's driving your project. If you're trying to meet a date, then I'm pretty hard on that. I'm pretty hard on any kind of scope change. But if that's not the driver, if the driver is something like just get the product, we need a certain level of completeness of the product, then that's a good time where the product owner can make that decision and say it would be better. It would be a better product if we did this. But if I'm driving to a date, I'm pretty hard on that. Anything else? Okay. I'm going to have to run through these pretty fast here because we're going to run out of time and I won't get to talk about everything else that I wanted. So this is the work in progress one. I think we covered that pretty well. Overproduction, I think we talked about that. So building quality in, we talked about doing the pair programming, the code reviews, test-driven development. Somebody heard of that? There's also behavior-driven development. That takes it even a step further. Test-driven development, the idea behind that, I'm not an expert on that, but the idea behind that is that you write a test first, like a unit test first, and you code to make it work. And then you start building off of that. But the idea is you start first with something that tests automatically and runs. And so that you know that the code you're building, you're starting with it working. Behavior-driven development takes it a step further than that. That you write the test in a language, I forget which language we use when we did this, in a language that's written by a business analyst usually, and so it's coming from a user standpoint. It's almost like writing a story, but it's written in such a way that it can also act as the test code, which then also drives. So that ties the code not only back to a test that runs, but back to the behavior that you're trying to get to for this. So those are other ways to start building quality in. Frequent integration. So I spoke earlier about not wanting to integrate your code until it's been through some checks. Probably a better word for that is merging it, because you don't want to just have stuff sitting on your local. And the idea is that you do want to integrate it with everybody else as frequently as you can. But you still want to go through those checks first, get the feedback, so you have to back things out, get the feedback and the feedback loop there, but integrated as often as you can, so you know. What we don't want is to have a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know. You know what that box looks like. See. So when you first start a project, these are the things that you know right here. Very little. There may be some things here that you know, that you don't know. These are things that you don't know, that you don't know. And that's the scary part. That's the scariest part of the project, is all the things that are out there. I'm in a situation right now with this project that I'm working on where we have a backlog of about 80 issues, they're called issues that we get that I can't get estimates on. I'm having a hard time with my product owner in this particular case, where she doesn't want to take the time to get estimates on the work because she wants the developers to be developing. So we're working through that. But what I keep trying to get through to her is, until we get those estimates, we don't know what this work is, and we don't know how long it's going to take, and you can't prioritize because you don't know. You might have something that's going to take a week that you think is really high priority, but when you could get 50 other things done in that time frame, maybe it's not such a high priority. So trying to get to the point where that that we don't know, to the small upper right corner, a very small piece, that's where we're shooting for. So integrating frequently helps you get to where you know, I know that it's broken. I didn't know that before I tried to integrate.
Another argument point for you, the designs of the future often affect the designs of today. If I know a backlog owner wants a certain set of features, and I'm working on a piece of code that's related to it today, and I know that's coming up, it might affect how I design it, so I don't have to redo it.
That's true, yeah. We have triage that kind of tells them what is coming, but it's the size. It's getting in there to the details of understanding the implementation of it that she's not wanting to take the time for. But yeah, designs. Deferring commitment, we talked about this. You mentioned the latest responsible moment, not the last minute, but the latest responsible minute. Creating knowledge, we talked about this pretty much. One other thing that I'll share is having the technical. So one of the misconceptions about Agile is that you don't do any documentation and there's no requirements, and that's completely false. So documentation happens, but it happens in such a way that it's integrated into your work. So commenting the code as opposed to writing functional specs, maybe. Keeping that updated. One of the things that I've seen burn teams over and over again is not keeping track of decisions that were made. So you make a decision, you decide to do something this way, you forget why you made that decision. 2 weeks later, you come back and say, why did we do this? And you remake the decision. Maybe you come to the same conclusion, maybe you don't. But that's waste. So that kind of key documentation we do. We just don't have fully, even the project plans are much minimized in Agile, but they're still there. There's still something there that provides the framework and where you're keeping track of key information. This is a key thing that I've mentioned multiple times, shortening the feedback loop. It applies to almost everything else that we've talked about, is trying to get information back to you as quickly as possible so that you can change what you're doing. So I'm going to draw something else up here.
Do you mind moving the whiteboard just a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's perfect.
Oh, for that?
Yeah, yeah.
Stephen, do you remember me explaining why you erase up and down?
Wait, write something down?
Why you erase up and down, not side to side?
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you remember that.
Is it HR safe?
Okay, so shortening the feedback loop.
What was
When,
the answer? Why do you erase that? It's a
You
body.
can't leave us like that.
Yeah.
It's a body motion.
it's a body motion. If I'm erasing this way, I'm doing this.
It's on your audience.
Okay, so in Agile, when you're building a product, one of the key things to think about, it's not easy. We are used to, particularly in Waterfall, we're used to building a product. This is not working. This layer, then this layer, then this layer, and finally going through and doing UI. That's how Waterfall used to do it. And then we'd test way up here. So that's not shortening the feedback loop. We don't know if anything's working until 8 months down the road. So with Agile, what you want to try to do is figure out how you can build vertically, all the way up through period. So instead of building the architecture layer and then, and then doing the DB development and SQL and all the stuff one layer at a time all the way across the product, try and do a section all the way up and see what you learn from that. And then you can apply it to the next section you're building. Some of this, we call it the architectural runway. There has to be some areas where you're building out ahead. But if you can limit that so that you're building as much in vertical strips as possible, it's going to shorten the feedback loop. And you'll learn from what you did in each one of these all the way up to what worked and what didn't work for the next round. Optimizing the whole, talked about this, avoiding the bottlenecks of the handoffs, trying very hard to eliminate that waste in terms of making those handoffs smooth and avoiding and streamlining those. Okay, so that was Lean. As you can, those of you that have experience in Agile, you can see pretty clearly how those concepts apply directly to what we're doing in Agile software development. So the Agile software development, this is so weird. Sorry, what happened now? I can't see my notes.
Oh,
That's okay, I'll just read off of here and hopefully remember what I want to say. It's a framework that promotes iterative development. So again, instead of building all the things across, we're doing an iteration at a time, a vertical stripe at a time, and learning from each of those, getting the feedback from each of those. So it talks about the life cycle. When we talk about iteration with Scrum, that's the easiest way to see that. We do 2 weeks, well, we do sprints, and a sprint can be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, I've heard. I almost always settled on a 2 week. I tried a 3 week, and I tried a 1 week. 1 week's kind of like a pressure cooker, and 3 weeks just seemed a little too long. That felt kind of, I don't know, loose. So a 2 week has almost always been the sweet spot where we've landed. So what that means is, in a 2 week period, We spend first day looking at what we need to do, talking about each one of the user stories that the product owner has decided they want in the sprint if they can, making sure that we understand all the questions, we've got all the artifacts we need, we've got the design. We should have already sized by then, so we should know approximately how many of these items from our backlog we can fit into the sprint. So in sprint planning, we go through and we talk about all those, make sure everybody's comfortable with them. I like to have, this isn't done everywhere, but my preference and what I suggest is that developers take those stories then and they break down the tasks. So they actually say, to do this story, because these are the things that I have to do. And they do that together as a team for various reasons. One reason is so that we cross-pollinate the knowledge, that we can cross-train everybody, anybody can pick that up because we've talked through the implementation steps together. Also, when you're doing it as a team, multiple minds bring different ideas of ways of doing it, and you can get a better flow there. So they would do that for every story that we put into the sprint. As they do that, again, my preference, doesn't happen everywhere, but my preference is that they are estimating each one of those tasks, and they're estimating that in hours. So at the end of the planning session, hearing an echo, at the end of the planning session, Scrum Master can look at the capacity for the sprint and say, this is the number of hours we have totally, the people are going to be here in town, not on PTO. This is the number of hours associated with the work. Now that we've broken it down to the very detailed steps of what we have to do, does it match? Do we need more stories? Do we need to take something out? The idea is that at the end of that planning session, everybody feels comfortable with what it is we've said we can do. And that's planning for 2 weeks worth of work. So that 2 week period then, every day we come in, we start with a stand up of some sort. The idea during that stand up is to say, this is what I'm working on today. Share knowledge if there's anything that needs to happen. Hey, what do you think about this? Are there any blockers? Is there anything that's keeping you from doing what you plan to do today? And if there are, let's take care of them. Scrum Master's job is to help remove those blocking issues. And then this is what I did yesterday. This is what I plan to do today. And then these are any blockers that I have. So that's the stand up, and it takes 10 to 15 minutes. And then you go back to work. But that keeps everybody in the loop on what the plan is for that day. So Joe knows if Sally's working on a project that she needs his help with, or that she needs his code from a different story to be in. We know about dependencies, we know what's going on, and every team member is fully aware of what's happening for that day. So that's repeated then, every day of the sprint. Yeah.
How long do you spend on typical?
Stand up, no more than 15 minutes. That brings into question the size of the team. So we like to keep team size between 5 and 7 people. And if it gets any more than that, it starts to get hard to manage. So you have options then. You can break the team up, have 2 different teams, and have a scrum of scrums. So everybody can be on the same page. There are various ways around that. But yeah, you get too much more than 7 people and it starts getting hairy. I had one scrum team that was 15 people once, and it was interesting. I answered the question. Somebody asked me a question I was trying to get to. Okay, sorry. So Agile, again, the reason behind Agile is because we need to be able to respond to changes that come. Remember when we start a project, we know very little. We've got that one little box in the left-hand corner, bottom left corner, we know what we know. Got a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know what we don't know. So as we iterate, we learn more, we learn more, we learn more. So we start halfway through the project, we then know that much, we don't know that much. And it helps us be able to deliver what people really want. The other thing is, not only do you know more about the code, about dependencies, about things that might block you, you also get feedback as you're getting these stories, these vertical stripes out to your customers in their hands. They like this, they don't like that, they want more of this. That feeds into your process. Your product owner takes that into consideration. One of the things I love about Mozilla is that we do regular user research projects. So for the product that I'm working on now, the Phoenix product, this is an Android, new browser for the Android. We, after every sprint, we put out a new version for our resource group to use to take to a group of users and watch them and coach them through to get their feedback specifically to what we produced in that particular sprint. It's so awesome. I've never worked anywhere that took it that seriously, and it feeds right back into our backlog. So we take their comments and the things that really make sense, and we put them right back into the product. So that's the way it's supposed to be. And delivering iteratively allows that. If you wait till the end of the project and you develop the whole entire product and then you get out to the users, you're not going to, I mean, what's the chances that you're going to get any feedback back into your product? Okay. Sorry, give me just a second. That's not gonna work.
If you go to the left and then click on the screen. There you go.
I can't get back there.
Oh, yeah, the mouse is there. So if you just click on that page and then I think you'll be able to hit next.
Ah.
There you go.
Sorry. Okay, so history of Agile, just very quickly. There's something interesting here. The Snowbird meeting that happened in 2001, that's where the Agile Manifesto was written by a bunch of people that were really smart and wanted to do things differently than waterfall. It included people like John Kern, extreme programming pioneers. Anybody heard about XP, extreme programming? That's not Agile. The way, at least that's not why. I think of extreme programming as being the developer aspect of Agile. It meets all those things that we're trying to, the benefits that we're trying to get out of it from a developer's point of view. So the pair programming, the code reviews, those kinds of things, as opposed to more of a project management that Scrum and Kanban refer to. So, so Agile was 2001. In 2003, Mary and Tom Hoppendick, they developed the form of Lean for software development. So they took the manufacturing Lean that we talked about that Toyota did, and they applied it to software development. And so that's a couple years after the Agile Manifesto that it became very clear that those concepts were very related and could be very, very useful together. So the other thing, I can't get to my notes and I can't remember what date it was, but this same group actually had met 2 years before in Oregon to get started on thinking about Agile. So I want to cover some of the advantages of Agile. Agile isn't for everyone, and it's not for every project. But some of the advantage that you have of it is you have better customer satisfaction because you're doing the rapid iterations and continuously delivering things and getting feedback and building it back in. The customers, developers, and testers are constantly interacting. The customer in this case, they're talking about the product owner. The product owner is the customer representative, you might say, to the development team, and they are constantly, every day, working together with the team to provide that information both ways. The developer saying, this is going to take longer, are you sure you want that? Product owner saying, I want it, let's do it. Product owner saying, let's not do that, let's do something else, it's faster. So there's that constant communication so that we're delivering the very best product that we can. Working software is delivered frequently. At Passport, we delivered every 2 weeks. So we not only had a sprint that lasted every 2 weeks, we released to our product base every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, we were providing additional value, something new, something different, bug fixes as well as enhancement requests. So the customers like that, mostly. I will say that you have to be careful. There was a particular product that was quite complex, and we learned pretty quickly that customers didn't like having it updated every 2 weeks because it changed their processes too much. So we had to work with them to discover what's the best release cycle for that, and it turned out a 6-month release cycle was what they preferred. So in some cases, 2 weeks is great. They liked the little changes. In other cases, it was too disruptive for them. They wanted it to come slower. So you work with your customers. I have to say, working at Mozilla is the strangest thing because I feel like I'm in a bit of a fishbowl. Everybody knows what's going on. It's open source, so everybody knows what we're doing. And I see it sometimes on Reddit before I even know. Like, oh my word, did we change the beta? Okay. So talked about the customers, software developed or delivered frequently. So we talked about regular adaptation to changing circumstances. As you learn new things, you adapt, and you bring those learnings in, and you make changes. Same thing happens retrospects. That's a form. That's one of the ceremonies. Why is that word escaping me? One of the ceremonies is at the end of every sprint. we do a retrospect. We look back at that 2-week period and say, okay, what worked? What really worked here? What didn't work? And in order to have a successful retrospect, you really have to have a team that knows each other and is comfortable and trusts each other. Because there's going to be things that come out, I don't like finger pointing, and it's something that I worked very hard to not have happen on teams, but things still need to be brought up. If it was one person's fault, we still need to bring it up. We don't have to point fingers and we don't have to place blame, but looking at what happened and figuring out why it happened and what we can do to not let it happen again, that's important. Yeah.
Do you ever have customers sit in on those?
No. Customers sit in on demos, but not the retrospects. Depending on your team, the team I have right now is a large team that includes 5 developers, 5 UX designers, 3 or 4 QA, and then I've got dependencies on 2 other teams that I don't actually manage. And so I've got a rep from each of the development teams, each of the 2 dependent teams, and I've got 2 to 3 reps from the UX and a QA rep. They all attend the retrospect because they're part of that delivery. So regular adaptation to changing circumstances. I feel like the retrospects are probably one of the most valuable things that we can do for the team. And I'll tell you, it depends. Somebody needs to manage them, and somebody needs to own making sure that we follow through on what we say in those retrospects, because there's going to come a whole list of action items. If nothing ever happens with those action items, what's the point? It's a waste of complete time, and it's a waste of your team's, not just time, but even morale. I mean, to say these are the things that we think need to change, and then you do nothing. So as a Scrum Master for my team, I make a practice of twice during the next sprint, I send out reminders of what the action items were from that last retrospect. Are we doing this? Next time we meet, we're gonna look back on these action items from the last sprint and say, did we do it or not? If we didn't do it, getting dinged. So, but just making sure that you follow up is so critical. And I've had so much, I've honestly, have you guys heard the term for teams forming, storming, and norming? That concept being when you first start with a new team, or you have an existing team and you add one person, that's restarting that team. It's a whole new entity. Anytime you add somebody to a team, it's a whole new entity. And you have to start the process over of forming that team, getting to know each other, getting to understand how you work together, what each person what they bring value-wise. Everybody adds some sort of value. What is it that you're bringing, and how do you work with that, forming it? And then you start having a little bit of conflict, and that storming part starts. Well, I don't think so. Well, I do. Well, okay, so let's work through this. What's the best? And you start earning that trust that allows you to get to the point where you can be norming and you can actually have very helpful and useful retrospects. So that you have to be patient with your team in that sense of letting them work through those phases to get to the point where there's really trust, and you can have very open retrospects that you bring things up that matter, that need to change, and then you work to change them. Mm-hmm. There we go. So, some of the disadvantages of Agile. There are some software deliverables, particularly the large ones, where it's really hard to understand the effort. Now, so it's hard to understand the effort. One of the purposes of Scrum is, as I mentioned earlier, is to have a predictability, so that if you know what your team is capable of, you know the velocity, what they're capable of doing in an iteration, and you know what the capacity is, who's going to be there for how long, then you can arrive at this is how long it's going to take us to do this work. That's important for most businesses. They want to know when. In terms of Mozilla, where I'm at right now, marketing wants to be 2 months out ahead of whatever I'm doing. So I need to be able to give them some kind of a milestone to say, this is when you need to start your stuff, because we're going to be ready to deliver 2 months later. So they need to know that. So that's part of what Agile, or that's part of what Scrum does. But it was really hard at the very beginning of our project at Phoenix to know exactly how long it's going to take. We started out listing all the features. These are the features that we want. But without diving into those features and figuring out what it's going to take to build them, we really had no idea how long it was going to take. It was a best guess. So it's called the cone of uncertainty. And the idea being, again, similar to this, we don't know what we don't know. But we want to tell you that at the beginning of the project, when we only know this much, we think that we can deliver between April 1 and August 1. We get further into the project and we can say, okay, now it looks like it's going to be somewhere between May 1 and June 1. And so you can continue to refine that estimate as you go and provide that information to them. So it helps somewhat, but it still is really hard in an Agile project where you're not taking the time up front to discover all of the requirements that you can and estimate them all. It's hard to give an exact date. So I try to steer clear. In this particular case for Phoenix, we were forced into providing an exact date. It's been very interesting of what we had to cut from the features that we initially wanted to deliver in order to meet that date. But scope was the one thing they said we could play with. So that's what we're playing with. So there's a lack of emphasis on necessary design and documentation. We talked about that. A lot of people go into Agile thinking, don't have to do any of that. This is just get in there and code and make it work. And it's not true. There still needs to be some emphasis on providing the documentation that keeps that allows you to maintain your code as well as make right decisions. Having UX documents, having designs, even if it's something scribbled on a piece of paper, that's still important. Can easily get taken off track if the customer representative is not clear what final outcome should be. So, in other words, you need a good, strong product owner. If you don't have a product owner that can make decisions, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, or the customer isn't available consistently.
Yes. That's one of the keys to Agile, is that you have a team where that customer is available all the time. It should be co-located with the development team. Because when you've got questions, you need to have them answered. It's such a waste of time to be waiting on that. But I've also seen where a product owner just doesn't really know what they want. And so they take you down this path, and then they take you down this path. And so it just gets completely out of control without having a decisive product owner. There's a lot that goes into being a good product owner. I'm amazed. The more I see of what the Mozilla team does for product ownership, I'm just amazed at what goes into that. So it's not an easy job. So this last one, only senior programmers are capable of making the kind of decisions required during that sprint, that development sprint. I suppose that's true. I would have a difficult time building a Scrum team out of all beginners. But I think Agile is a perfect way to bring a beginner into the team. If you've got senior developers in there, bringing someone in as a beginner, that's the perfect way to do it. Waterfall is terrible for that. But Agile works really well because it's very team focused.
And your short iterations mitigate the risk of an early developer running off track.
Exactly. That risk is much diminished when you're checking in every day as well as every week and readjusting, yeah. Any other comments? So similar to this is the other slide, but this is a little more concrete, I guess is the word. Better product quality for the reasons that we discussed. Higher team morale. In Waterfall, boy, you can get stuck in a cycle of it's never ending, and then you get to the last 2 months of the project and it's a death march to try and finish it. That rarely happens. I will say though, I've worked with people that were new to Agile that had a hard time adjusting to the sprint. What we're looking for here is someone that can find a cadence, find a level of work, and keep at it. You're jogging, and it's something that you keep up forever. You don't want to sprint so hard. When do they say sprint? You don't want to sprint so hard that you're working at a level 10 out of 0 to 10. You want to run at about a 6 or a 7, and you want to be able to keep doing that. So if you're getting pushed too hard, you're gonna burn out. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna have defects. You're gonna have lack of quality. If you're working too slow, then you're gonna drag your team down. So it's finding that balance. And if you're the kind of person that's used to being able to and prefers leisurely and then kill yourself, that doesn't work well in Agile. We have to have a team where everybody is keeping that pace, and it's a steady pace. And there are some people I worked with that just didn't work well in that environment. Higher customer satisfaction because that feedback is coming in, they're getting a say, they get to see things. A lot of more increased collaboration and ownership, co-located. That's the other thing that I forgot to mention. In most agile teams, we shoot for 5 to 7 people on the team. You want to have them co-located if possible. Right now, my team is completely distributed. I've got 1 person in Portland, I've got 3 in Toronto, I've got 1 in New Zealand, 2 in Vancouver, and a couple in Germany. So completely distributed. It's a challenge. It's a whole lot easier when everybody's on site. We use video conferencing a lot, and that does help.
So you mentioned a developer that likes to be leisurely. In that case, did the rest of the team put peer pressure on them to increase their performance? Because Agile, especially in this format, has to be a team-driven thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't see that happening with the team. The person themselves were not happy. They didn't like it. And they probably did feel that pressure and not like it. So you guys, I'm sorry, it's 2 o'clock already. What would you like to do? You want me to, I can keep going?
Are you out of slides?
I have a few more minutes that I can go. What's that?
You're good.
Okay. We'll go through as quickly as we can.
If you hover over the Firefox logo on your screen, you should see the your notes come up. If you click on it, it
Yeah,
should come up.
I tried that and it
Didn't work. Sorry.
So that's all right. Okay, so moving on. What makes Agile work? So these are some of the things that I mentioned that we've already talked about in terms of team size. The other thing is it's really important that you have dedicated team members, that you don't have a person that's working on multiple projects, that everybody's focused on this one team. And that way you don't have the context switching, as well as you know what your capacity is going to be for that team because you know who's on it. Stable teams, trying to keep the same team intact throughout the life cycle of the product is awesome. If you're taking people off and on that product, then you're forming, and norming all the time. So trying to keep that team stable. Team size of 7 plus or minus 2. Limiting the work in progress. We already talked about this. All the things that we can do to reduce defect rates and reduce the waste is very helpful in making Agile work for what you're trying to do. Regular estimation of effort. So talked a little bit about the backlog grooming and the triage. Triage, the purpose of triage is to look at everything coming in and decide how important it is, along with everything else on your backlog that you have to do. Where do we slot these things in priority-wise? Later on, we do the backlog grooming. That's something that involves the whole team. The team gets together, looks at each one of these items, and tries to determine a size. Different ways of doing sizing. I usually use a Fibonacci point system, where we assign points based on relative effort. So you don't say this is going to take me 10 hours. You say this story is about this hard compared to this story or this story. So it falls right in here somewhere, and you assign a point value to that.
Is that based on historical?
It is, and it gets better and better. Yeah, so when I came into Mozilla, they had no idea. And our points were fluctuating all over the place. It took about 3 sprints for us to get into where we were actually, things were evening out. And now I have a picture of velocity for them. So that's this. At the beginning of the project, we did some t-shirt sizing at the feature level. And so that was kind of our first estimation. This feature is going to be large. That's all we know. It's a big feature. This feature is maybe not so large. It might even maybe a medium or a small. Then we get into the actual stories, right? The user stories, and we size those with the Fibonacci. The next level of estimation is then when we do the task breakdown during planning. And we actually estimate by hour. So one thing about estimation, nobody likes it. Hard. The only way to get better is to do it more. So doing it 3 times to get to a level is going to give you the best output. So there was some research that did a comparison of teams that didn't estimate at all, that estimated stories in hours versus estimating stories in points and tasks in hours. And then teams that only estimate using the story points, I can't even read. And drop tasks. Okay, yeah. So this unfortunately is fairly common when teams get rushed. They want to dive into the development. They don't want to take the time. Generally, for a team of 5 to 7 people, it's going to take all day to do planning. You spend a couple of hours with the product owner looking at the stories. Then you spend the rest of the day breaking out the tasks. And that's a long, hard day. Nobody wants to do it, but it's worth it, I believe. So what they discovered was that teams that did not use estimates had 2.5 as many defects not even talking about efficiency or meeting goals, we're talking about defects. I thought that was so interesting. Teams that use story points and task hours had fewer defects. I can't remember what the number was. Than teams that only use story points. So if they broke it down into tasks, there were fewer. So basically, the more time you're taking in there to estimate and to get to the details of things, the fewer defects you're going to have. Not just time. Okay, quickly into the different frameworks. Scrum is most widely used. I think the numbers most recently are like 60% of people doing Agile are using the Scrum framework. About 30% are using Kanban. That's the second most widely used. Are you guys familiar with Kanban, the terminal? So mainly, we'll talk about this, but Kanban, well, I think we just get into it. Extreme programming, you guys, we talked about that again. I call these two more of a project management framework and this more of a development framework. In my mind, that's how those kind of lay out. Feature-driven development, I didn't even get into these. These are not things that I'm familiar with. I just knew they were out there and put them on there. So talking about what Scrum is, the main focus in Scrum is cadence and predictability. So the cadence being your sprint cycle, 1 week, 2 week, 3 week sprints, being able to predict based on the velocity of your team and the capacity of your team for that time frame when you're going to finish. That's dependent, of course, on having a very good understanding of what the product is, and that becomes more clear as we work towards the end of the product. An iteration is a short, fixed unit of time. Call them sprints, usually 2, 3, or 4 weeks long. The point is to get into such a predictable pattern that you can look ahead. We have a backlog, we call it a backlog of all the things that we want to do. They're hopefully in user story, written out in user stories. And each one of those we start sizing and getting a feeling for. So we've got this huge backlog. We separate that into sprint backlogs as we plan each sprint. We take what are the next most important things, pull that into the sprint, and then we've got this backlog again. The idea then is knowing what we have on our team for capacity and for velocity. We've got this many things in our backlog. If nothing more comes in, which we know is untrue, if nothing more comes in, this is the delivery date we're looking at. And then as more things come in, then you have a burn down of your project saying, okay, our scope added this much to the project. This is how far, now it's going to take this much longer to burn down and to get the product out the door. Every sprint, you look at that and you say, okay, we added this much more. It's going to take this much longer. And you can do that based on your cadence, based on your capacity. It's well suited for feature development work because usually the work is in larger, vaguer chunks. And you can break them down into stories. So we start with a feature maybe. The feature for Phoenix would be, we want to be able to, better not use that one. But we've got a brand new feature coming out. We want tracking protection. Tracking protection is a feature that we're going to work on that we want to put out. And then we say from that tracking protection, okay, I want to be able to log every site that that's taking my information. I want to be able to say some sites are okay, some are not. I want to be able to report on all the sites that have been tracking my information. There may be multiple other stories that come out of that feature. Some of those stories are going to be big enough that we could just break them into multiples themselves. So in that case, you may have an epic in there. So you start with a feature. You might break that down to epics. An epic would be a grouping of stories that are all related under that feature. And then you've got the individual stories. So those chunking the work into pieces like that helps manage and prioritize the work. And that's not something that Waterfall generally does. So in Agile, that is an effort that we go through to try and get a good understanding of what we have to do and how much it's going to take and what the priority is. So as I mentioned with Passport, we would do 6-month releases. So we can release every 2 weeks on some projects. On some of the big ones, we might release after 6 months. So Phoenix, we're not releasing at this point. Well, we are. It's coming out nightly. People are looking at it. Very strange. But it won't be public release. The public release is a 6-month project. So we started in January. It's going to come out in June. And that's how that works. But after that, we're going to iterate almost immediately every 2 to 4 weeks with new features coming out. So that first chunk of 6 months was getting a minimum viable product that we can put out there and our customers can see and use and give us feedback on. and then we're going to turn around and immediately iterate on all the new stuff. So that's one of the things that Scrum can do, because we can predict and we can have those done. So Kanban, there's no sprints. Kanban is a list of prioritized items, and you grab the top item and you start working on it. And you use columns of in progress or blocked or ready for QA, and you move those across. The idea is that it gives you, it's the fastest way to get products, how do I say it here? The focus is on breaking out and visualizing the pieces of your work, so you can map the work items into specific states. And it's the whole goal of Kanban is to move things quickly through the process, not to be predictable. You don't know. You don't even. Many teams I've seen don't even size Kanban items. I don't know how you can plan without having any kind of sizes on them. But I've seen a lot of teams just start dragging things across, and all they're doing really is giving it some kind of a window into the work they're doing and trying to get through things as quickly as possible. The idea is that you, similar to the concepts that we talked about for Lean, you don't want too many things going on at once, so you'll put limits on each one of the columns. So you don't want too many things in progress at any one time. You don't want too many things in QA, so you'll put limits on those and say, so if we have too many things in QA, we have to work to get those out of QA before we pick anything else up in there. So that helps manage the flow to make sure that we're not getting all those bottlenecks that keep us stopped. Okay, so well suited for work where there's no big backlog and you're not trying to meet a date. So teams that are assigned to fixing production, and so this is the response team that I mentioned earlier. We've got production issues that are coming in. We have a Kanban board, and that's how we worked through them. We just always had the very top left item was the most important, the most highest priority, and that's the one we picked up next, and we just go pushing through. So teams that are most successful with Kanban are those that are supporting business teams. They're focused on serving the business to keep the software running. It's a maintenance team, basically. And their priorities change on a daily basis. If you have priorities changing on you on a daily basis, it's pretty hard to do Scrum, because we ask that you lock in for 2 weeks. The team has a 2-week period of time. They know what they're working on and they can focus on. If your priorities are changing so quickly that you can't lock in to a 2-week period, Kanban's going to be better for you, because that changes every day. Changes in everything, anything new comes in, basically. The other thing I found is Kanban is a nice way to get started thinking on Agile terms. So for a brand new team that's never done any Agile projects, Kanban is a nice way to get introduced to it. It's low maintenance, it's fairly easy, unless you start doing it really well. And that it gives you, it starts you thinking in that terminology of quickly moving things through. The other time that it works well is when you've got a team that's been in Scrum, that is very mature and very disciplined, and then they can come back to a Kanban base and be very effective with that. I've seen that happen a couple of times. I generally tend to stick with Scrum for teams, because you have to have a team that's been together for a long time to be very good at Kanban. So then just a quick comparison of the two. And that's all. Sorry we went over.
Good.
Any other questions before I take off?
I have a good question, but have you ever used Scrum or Kanban in a development organization that also used matrix organizational management?
Yes. I mean, I use Matrix.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that working with product owners and people like that in that situation was harder or easier? Or did you just mandate the same thing, that the product owner had to be the one voice in terms of...
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't see any way around that, honestly. If you want to make it work, I don't see any way around it. So in both at Nike and at Mozilla, I'm acting as a Scrum Master as well as an Agile coach. And so I get to provide suggestions, and strong suggestions for how things should be done. If I'm in an area where I'm a Scrum Master and I'm not in the role of Agile Coach, I don't have as much say, and it makes it more difficult. But the Scrum Master really should be in a position to help in an Agile coaching way as well, to keep things on track and to make sure that the process is smooth and correct. Yes? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.